She meticulously cleaned and preserved everything she could, occasionally exchanging the meat for supplies from Tobias Inn. Such deeds the village marveled at Silver's loyalty, not just as a pet, but also acknowledged his predatory strength, a collaborator in their tenuous existence. But as the years went by, Agatha's health, even simple tasks became difficult due to stooped backs, rheumatic joints, and fatigue eyes. A challenge, Sela, a mature wolf of astounding size, assumed an almost. As a sentinel, he would stand guard in the yard, making sure that neighbors who ventured to approach the cottage were confronted with a threatening critter or a wayward fox who threatened his mistress. A tall, furry, and fanged figure silently warned them to stay away unless they intended no harm. In private, Agatha read aloud from an old story and treasured the company that had prevented her loneliness. Stories of knights, mystical animals, and woodlands in her tremulous voice. Sometimes she would think Sela knew every word for something as wild as their own. Despite her, he would put his head on her lap and flick his ears at her vo's cadence, externally soothe her mounting concerns about Agatha Silva's future if she wasn't longer around to mentor him. She had overheard some people calling him a monster behind her back because they thought he had turned into a danger. She would say a quiet prayer as she passed away late at night by lantern light, wishing Silva would find refuge rather than a lynch mob when the time came. Though her low means and weak stamina prevented her from mailing letters to distant relatives or to an animal refuge, frequently derailed such intentions. But winter finally arrived with full force, howling above the snow-covered woodland canopy around the crooked cottage. Pale Silver floated close to Agatha as she coughed more frequently, her face drawn. Occasionally, she will push her covers into position or whine in a quiet, melancholy voice at her growing frailty. Despite being lovingly touched by the blazing hearth, Agatha shivered in the chilly evening. Sela's muzzle eyes are full of thanks and sadness since you've kept me. Silver pressed closer as though attempting to speak in a whisper. Are you alive? Unbeknownst to her neighbors, who rarely see her these days, he warmed her with his own body. Agatha felt her death was imminent, found comfort in the knowledge that Sela had grown from the small puppy she had saved to a magnificent being capable of. If only the villagers' superstitions would spare him from the silent stress of that last winter man, he could survive. And Beast formed a partnership based on a bond that went beyond any idea of predator or caregiver. By the time the snow hit the windowsills, there was intense love and mutual reliance. How Sela would respond if Agatha abandoned him was the question that hung in the icy air, if it weren't for no longer herself, but for the enormous wolf's future, whom she thought of as her only family in that quiet before the storm. Nobody in the community could have foreseen the shocking gesture of loyalty that would follow Agatha's death, so they would be rendered inarticulate and forced to reconsider all of their preconceived notions about the elderly woman and her majestic friend. As the woodland was silently ensnared by the frost-laden winter, Agatha's health continued to decline. She began to breathe in daze and heavy wheezes more suddenly than anyone had anticipated. She never left the ancient rocking chair by the fire, and Sela, the enormous wolf, whose might and presence had rarely left her side, even when hunger pangs pulled at his stomach and grew with every season, went out for a little while and quickly returned with whatever small game he could find. It seemed as though his instincts had changed to take into account this new reality, safeguarding Agatha when her twilight was more significant than wandering aimlessly, knowing that Agatha might soon need more help than he could offer on his own. The nearby farmer, Tobias, was hesitant to enter the cottage because he was worried about Sela's extreme size and lupin gaze. He managed to elude the wolf's vigilant observation. Agatha's appreciative grin whenever Tobias places a basket of fresh milk or bread on the table showed him that empathy wasn't limited to the physically fit as he observed the wolf imitating Agatha's every move with concerned eyes made him uneasy, but they also made him act with reluctant respect. He once told his wife that he was more like a loyal dog than a beast, but I still can't say that I fully trust him just yet. Agatha's strength waned on a cold day during Tobias's visits and silent prayers. In the morning, as she lay in bed with the wolf at her feet, she finally confessed in him in a weak murmur, I know I don't have She admitted that her voice was weak for a long time. My biggest fear is not death, but what? When I'm gone, Tobias will be moved by her request and swear to see to it that. Even while he secretly questioned how the people would respond, many still saw Silver as ticking a wolf, especially one that big, had no place in their peaceful environment. Settlement. Would they band together to chase Silver away if rumors circulated that Agatha was gone, or would things get worse while Lily was? The town's inquisitive youngster, who was fascinated by stories, heard rumors at the neighborhood bakery about Agatha's deteriorating health. Of a wolf that disregarded the natural limits, she decided to go one afternoon in spite of her mother's cautions. The wolf appeared behind a drift as Lily was making her way to the crooked cottage down the snow-packed road. Lily had never been this close to a monster so powerful, but the wolf was tall and silent, and her heart was pounding. Simply stood with their ears perked up and their tail down in cautious interest, detecting no danger in. Silver, the girl, let her knock on the door without a response, and Agatha coughed into a. Over the course of the following hour, Lily was drawn in by the threadbare blankets, soft wave, assisted Tobias in cleaning the messy living area and making a moderate tea that Dr. Braxton suggested the wolf watch closer, but stayed composed as if embracing Lily as a member of the tiny circle of goodwill, encircling his ailing Lily's eyes frequently strayed to Silva's captivating gaze, both. Later, she told her pals that she had never been so enthralled and uneasy. Any creature with such a deep aura would describe it as though he understands every emotion we have, just like Agatha did. Her relationship with Silver seemed to strengthen the Samnite villagers as her strength declined. Claimed to have heard low, melancholy howls coming from the direction of her cottage, as though the wolf was singing lullabies to help her feel better. Agatha rubbed his enormous head in response, whispering sweet things that no one else could ever understand. "You saved me from. We've done well, haven't we?" she told him once, her voice shaking. "I tried to save you from the cold." Despite these intimate moments, the tension in the relationship would still be present when Wolf would respond with a gently nudge and place his head on her lap. Community-intensified rumors spread about what could occur if Agatha passed. Others argue that Silva had to be removed for public safety, noting his advanced age. Others' concerns about wolves betraying people were influenced by Tobias's hesitant. Lily's ebullient tales and commendation suggested that the wolf showed greater loyalty than certain groups of domestic canines, made each person fervently certain of their position without their knowledge. As the silent clock approached Agatha's dying breaths, their arguments became heartbreakingly pointless and icy. Agatha drifted down to sleep on the first starless night in weeks. Tobias discovered her the following morning after dropping off some hot soup. She was lying quietly behind a shabby quilt, seemed simply sleeping, with Sela keeping watch at the bedside. There was a droop in the wolf's shoulders. His eyes' bleak shine revealed a heartbreaking sorrow that went beyond simple animal suffering. The handful gathered were informed of her dying by instinctively hearing Tobias' voice. After hearing the news, the neighbors who had gathered outside cautiously entered the cottage, partly expecting the. In the days that followed, they observed Lunge lying close to Agatha's icy hand, pressed against the bed muzzle. Afterwards, the town organized a simple funeral, with only a few people present to guard the corpse, and Sela sat far away during the ceremony, her huge, motionless eyes fixed on the proceedings as though anticipating Agatha's resurrection again, which unnerved some. Others were subtly stirred by his presence and the show of devotion when the wolf was eventually placed into the frozen ground. It let out a loud, melancholy howl that reverberated across the snow-covered fields, giving everyone a chill, even those who were afraid of him. The roar of sadness causes tears to fill up, and initially, they thought the wolf would meander back to the jungle where he had come from, but Sela continued to circle. In the event that the villagers chase him away, the new grave will not cause a wave of uncertainty. Take him by force for a far-off sanctuary or honor his grieving Lily, who stood watch with tears streaming down her face. Silver was lying at the graveside, watching Tobias as if he may keep Agatha company while he died, as he had throughout his life. So, during the height of this public sorrow and controversy, The scene was prepared for the wolf's most incredible deed, a gesture so profound and surprising that it would test any presumption on the love and loyalty of a wild animal in the. Those who had questioned Agatha's relationship with Silvera faced the unimaginable in the silence of that winter cemetery. In addition to losing his closest friend, the enormous wolf was also struggling with a grief that betrayed genuine attachment. Overcoming a barrier between species that no one had thought was possible, the question on everyone's quivering lips was what would the wolf do next? In the days after Agatha's funeral, the village was ensnared in every time they passed the plain wooden cross that marked her burial, neighbors exchanged uneasiness. Perched a few yards away on the edge of the tiny cemetery, the enormous wolf maintained an unflinching silence. Vigil from sunrise to sunset, and frequently throughout the night, he insisted on staying there despite the bitter weather. With drifting snow, several locals were impressed by the show of devotion and placed crumbs of meat or drink bowls close by. Some cautioned that allowing a wild predator to wander freely was too risky, especially one sorrowful and possibly erratic. As a light snowfall sprinkled the tombs one day, Lily went with a bag of leftovers and a tense heart. She anticipated seeing Silver in the cemetery. He was there, coiled in grief, his enormous body partly buried in the snow. Wind-ruffled fur laying on his pay's muzzle, his eyes never leaving Agatha's last resting spot, his silence. With a mixture of amazement and sympathy, grief overcame Lily as she approached gently, offering. Instead of eating the food, Silver gave him a piece of cooked chicken, looked at her, and then spit out a low-pitched whine. Pushed it away as like it didn't matter after Agatha left. A pang held Lily's chest and asked how long hunger or sadness would last if he didn't eat. Claimed him, and soon after, rumors of Sela's refusal to leave the cemetery spread around the community, sparking discussions about how Tobias, the farmer who frequently brought food to Agatha, argued in order to step in for catching the wolf and taking him to a refuge far from the hamlet. He thought, shaking his head. Others insisted that he be forced to eat, but we can't let him starve. Dr. Braxton, who had previously visited Agatha's cottage, suggested a kinder solution because removing him was both risky and cruel. Try to gradually entice Silvera with food and soothing tones in order to warmer surroundings. But every effort to convince the wolf was unsuccessful. Refused to let anyone try to bring him back to life. And in the midst of this impasse, the first significant turn occurred. A group of young people from the area who were dubious of the wolf's alleged tenderness. They arrived at the graveyard late one night with flashlights in the intention of scaring Silver away themselves. Teenagers' boldness and bravery were meant to scare the wolf into running away, maybe as a show of strength or calm their own anxieties. But as they moved forward, shouting and illuminating the air with beams of light, electric silver appeared to sprout all around them, and they climbed on all fours, their muscles and coiled teeth glinting in the flicker of moonlight. A loud, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest that echoed through the chilly earth. Although none of the young people were hurt physically, the wolf's warning caused them to freeze in fear beneath their feet. Unmistakably, they dispersed, falling back to the village on a rush of adrenaline, while hearing tales of a giant monster glaring them down the following morning, and tales began to circulate like wildfire. Some people said the wolf was. Some claimed it was only an animal, but others claimed it was possessed by Agatha's spirit, guarding her tomb from intruders. Tobias became dangerously hooked on an area that smelled of humans after learning of the boys' botched stunt reprimanded their carelessness, but they saw it as evidence that something needed to be done. The next time the second revelation occurs, his grief can erupt more violently. Even more shocking was the account of a wandering peddler who stopped at the cemetery out of curiosity. According to the peddler, Sela had been observed softly pouring at the wolf during the early pre-dawn hours. The peddler appeared to be digging up the soil of Agatha's grave, but he wasn't actually trying to find her. Protested in a tone that was part scared and half more like, "I don't know," cleaning the scene out of concern that it's madness. Yet that's how the mental. Those who saw the sight of a wolf meticulously brushing over the ground, as though paying last respects, felt shivers. Some others found the story to be a potent illustration of the connection between women and Others saw it as proof that the wolf had ventured into unnatural territory. Villagers were upset by a threat that went against typical wildlife behavior, so they called a serious discussion in the nearby church hall. The small room seemed tense, with whispers resonating off the pale walls. Some called for quick action to chase the wolf away, claiming that it was an omen when an animal lamented a human burial. A few concerns about an unnatural link that might only result in violence, including. Lily's Rose objected, stating that Silva's allegiance was not based on evil magic. Fear still dominated many, even if it was neither an omen nor a sign of true attachment. Lily's father was caught in the middle of this discussion, urging them to support harsh actions. He was torn between admiring the wolf's dedication and exercising care, but he couldn't deny his concern for Lily's welfare. That Silva exuded an unearthly earnestness by refusing to leave Agatha's tomb. Following an hour of contentious debates, Dr. Braxton eventually stood up and offered a solution that would let me and a few volunteers an opportunity to keep an eye on the wolf and see if we can lead him to a safer area, or at the very least make sure he is fed. Her request to be non-aggressive struck a chord with those who didn't appreciate the idea of killing or capturing the wolf, but was still uncomfortable leaving him at a gravesite. So, throughout the following week, Tobias was part of a rotating group, brought water and meat in an effort to keep the vigil at a distance, with each person observing from behind age headstones. When they got within a few yards of the grave, Silver would raise his hackles, but he hardly ever bared his teeth. He seemed to just put up with their presence as long as they didn't try to replace him as the caregiver for the. An old man who had known Agatha when she was small spoke of the wolf's silent guardianship in the cemetery as both the most heartbreaking and exquisite scene I've ever seen, and it was within that whirlpool of tragic beauty and impending doom that the village was split apart in preparation for Sela's final unexpected act, unknowingly prepared for the time when the wolf's morning devotion would materialize in an ultimate, astounding performance that would solidify Agatha's belief in his gentle spirit, reinterpreted the nature of the ferocious predator, and echoed. Every day that Sela Agatha's enormous wolf stayed at her side, perpetuating the region's folklore for future generations. Those who supported Mercy felt their hearts ache at the cemetery site, which appeared to exacerbate the town's emotional agony. In the middle of the headstones, the majestic monster, standing sentinel, is a resolute symbol of. Those who are more inclined to be suspicious murmured about danger and ill omens, their uneasiness heightened by the wolf's eerie conduct, and those straddling the line, such as Lily's father or the nearby farmer Tobias, felt the burden of. Despite the increasing pressure to make a decision, Agatha's funeral had been calm and simple. Following the service, the town's residents congregate in small groups to discuss the odd in whispered tones. Every day brought new theories about why the wolf persisted in refusing food or shelter, unless. Some claimed that the fact that it was positioned directly at the gravesite was evidence of the unbreakable bond Agatha had formed with. As the snows persisted, the beast others deemed it an indication of trouble due to the wolf's abnormal bond. Once the coldest evenings of the year arrived, Lily decided to deliver a daily offering of hot scraps in the hopes. With each visit, Silva may take a brief break from his vigil while her gaze wandered the quiet cemetery half. She continued ignoring the sidelong glances, fearing a confrontation with the town's residents who disapproved of her kindness. Every time, Sela stayed silent and only ever gave Lily a gentle tilt and acknowledgement. Rarely did he take a nibble from her fingers out of his enormous head, silently eating it and then returning to his watch. Lily's father was caught between. Due to his fatherly caution and his developing admiration for his daughter's compassion, he also returned to the cemetery site. He remained at a reasonable distance, arms crossed, his thoughts racing, but he never ventured to get as close as Lily did. Considering opposing ideas, if the wolf's watch continued forever, what was? One evening, he said to Tobias, "The end game, it can't stay there forever." To avoid disturbing Silver, two guys crouched behind a row of evergreens. But if we push him away, we run the risk of irritating him or demolishing a sacred object. Tobias, who had previously made a strong case for seizing Silver and sending him to a shelter, watched with grudging admiration. I'll confess, He uttered slowly, "I've never seen it." This kind of animal grief makes it seem as though he is protecting her, even after death. The father simply nodded and gave them a thoughtful look as the wind blew a gentle whistle across the tombstones between them. His eyes, while Miss Hawkins, the journalist, watched what was happening. With a mixture of curiosity and prudence, she saw the possibility of a human interest narrative that may resound well beyond their small village. But she was also aware of the narrow. To sensationalize the wolf's vigil might. RPP members all made the smallest movement. Ms. Hawkins produced drafts of the article to provoke a protest from those who thought a huge predator had no place among humans. When a wolf mourns out love beyond life is an article that avoided publication, conscious that attracting additional attention would jeopardize Silver's tenuous acceptance in the community. Reactions varied greatly. Some locals were inspired by the wolf's devotion and started placing tiny memorials close to Agatha's grave, a candle to warm it, and a jar of lavender to cover off the smell of fresh earth. Others expressed their ire and complained to local authorities about the cold nights, saying that a big wolf was besieging the graveyard, which was disrespectful to their own deceased loved one's memory. A kind man named Father Everett, the pastor in charge of the cemetery, discovered being in a moral bind. He questioned whether this creature's mourning was not a reflection of God's creation during the voice of the Sunday sermon reverberating off the church's rafters suggests that instead of shunning him, we should open our hearts. In the midst of these tensions, earnest remarks simply served to further polarize the village. Braxton discreetly worked with a local district conservation officer to find a fair solution that protected the wolf's independence while preventing confrontations with the locals. The officer, upon hearing the tale, a wolf that was both skeptical and intrigued. "If I go out there to get him," he said, "refusing to leave a grave is, let's say, not a typical behavior. He might cause more harm than good. So maybe we should give him more time without any immediate danger." Coming from Sela, the police believed there was no urgent need for removal as long as the residents of the town could be patient. As Lily arrived with a tin of leftovers in the icy dusk, she discovered Silver clustered. Concerned, she drew closer than ever before to Agatha's headstone. For a horrifying moment, she saw the wolf's ragged breathing and distracted gaze, and she thought he might be hurt or ill. Mustering the bravery to reach out, she trembled, and Sela stirred and buried his muzzle against her palm, letting out a little cry as the raw Lily was nearly broken by the sadness in his eyes, which mirrored her own anguish. Resolution, he bowed his head upon the snow, as if he were giving in to a grief that was gentle as she called his name. His own desire to live was gradually being drained as he saw Lily's eyes flooded with tears in her eyes. She understood that although Silvera's presence paid tribute to Agatha's memory, it also put his own survival in jeopardy throughout the winter. As if giving up his vigil, he refused to hunt or leave the cemetery for more than a few minutes throughout the harsh evenings. Would betray their shared tie. "You can't die here," she said in a whisper, her voice breaking with grief. Losing yourself in that heartfelt confession tarnished her proud memory, and Lily accepted the emotional predicament that the town's residents honor the wolf's unheard of love while keeping it from degenerating into self-destruction. Lily's father and Tobias exchanged grim nods as they watched the punishment from a distance. The dog's once gleaming fur had become more muted and haggard. The father whispered to Tobias that wild sheen appeared lifeless beneath the drab sky. Tobias nodded his lips, saying, "You have to do something or he'll waste a lot of time out here." A predetermined line, whether they were planned or led Silver to a safer haven. Time for a gentle intervention was running out, and Agatha's death had sparked afresh. Test the level of humility and compassion that a community could muster for an animal that they barely comprehended. So as the nights lengthened and the last silence descended upon the rows of headstones, the scene was prepared for the wolf's final choice or destiny, a culmination of steadfast devotion and terrible need, because a single question lurked in the neighbors' worried hearts and the child's quiet weeping. Would the last testament of Agatha's legacy be a wolf's death upon Silvera's death, or could they rescue him from his own sorrow? A sour wind blew across the cemetery, hill, sending fresh air to her frozen tomb. Crystals of snow that glistened under the pale sun. Yet the town's residents remained split over Silver's unflinching. New issues that were present at Agatha's burial threatened to make the whole scenario worse. The emotional stakes for all parties involved were raised by the subplots that surrounded the main drama of A Wolf's Mourning. One chilly morning, the first issue showed itself as a dusty black SUV thundering into town, and a severe-looking woman wearing a thick Parker Dana clean stepped out from the local diner, a representative from A. Word had spread through the regional wildlife department about a big wolf haunting a grave. Through unofficial routes, generating enough interest and worry for the organization to send someone to investigate the situation. Together with her assistant, Dana collected statements from the locals in a methodical manner, listening to them in a courteous manner. As they told the tale of how Agatha had brought Seela up from a puppy and how the wolf now wouldn't leave her side, they became silent, in death and how. While half of the population watched in wonder and took meticulous notes, the other half wanted to push the beast away. She didn't say much, but her eyes showed that she was solving the riddle with a critical mind, whereas Lily had grown to be Silva's loyal ally, became more concerned that the rumors of government interference might. After determining that Seela was a public threat, the wildlife agent insisted on capturing or killing him. The decision was made after careful consideration. Using dread, Lily attempted to explain to Donna that Silva is nice and that he is only harming Dana. Courteously thanked Lily for her ideas while maintaining a neutral expression, but the woman's. Lily was reminded by measured detachment of physicians prioritizing clinical judgments above empathy. At the same time, journalist Miss Hawkins saw a chance to expand her coverage, which she had been doing in secret, recording Silva's watch and obtaining the moving picture of a huge wolf enduring the weather to be close to Agatha's. After learning of Dana's presence, Ms. Hawkins set up an interview in the hopes an official viewpoint may strengthen her developing piece. So Dana graciously declined, stating that she would first file a. Despite her disappointment, the journalist did not let it prevent her from reporting to her superiors. As they continued to collect testimonies from neighbors, some elderly individuals disclosed an unexpected fact. Agatha had previously been a midwife who provides care for both human and animal orphans. This new information clarified why she was eager to adopt Silver, but it also sparked speculation about another subplot. Agatha had saved. In her early years, she had an almost mystical bond with Forrest through multiple wolves. Creatures as the village watched these tales develop, a second difficulty emerged in the shape of. Not all those who heard about a giant that was said to be tame were dishonest opportunists. When the wolf responded empathetically, some outsiders started to wander around the town, driving beaten vehicles and questioning Lily's father about Silver's precise whereabouts and state. Observed one of these males hanging around the graveyard, obviously scrutinizing the wolf while pretending to be interested in the tombstones. According to an old story, wealthy collectors would pay a hefty price for rare animals, or there conceals a simmering worry that someone would try to steal Silver for financial gain if knowledge gets out. Tobias of the farmer decided to maintain an informal watch, enlisting a few worried neighbors who, like Lily, felt that Seela should be protected. Therefore, they established a flexible schedule for keeping watch over the tomb after dark. While some people found the arrangement reassuring, others were concerned that no one would bother the wolf at night. Could lead to conflict with any possible criminals or poachers. Dr. Aware of the growing tension, Braxton sent medical kits and guidance on how to avoid conflict if they come seeking. She told him not to engage, to contact the ranger, to call the police, since there is no life in. In the midst of these developing schemes, Lily balanced her value in a vigilante battle. On emotional struggles, schoolwork piled up, yet she struggled to focus, and her dreams were interrupted by pictures of Agatha's gentle grin fading into darkness or Silver keening in the snow. The burden of everything placed on her impressionable shoulders, the fervent wish that Seela would endure his sorrow, and occasionally, Lily would confide in her father's consoling presence, or Ms. about the growing threats from outsiders. Hawkins is attentive ear, but every time she faced the wolf's mute, unyielding form, she sensed a voiced request in. One afternoon when Miss Hawkins got a tip, His gaze shielded me and allowed me to grieve. That a few locals were concerned by the wolf's steadfast watch, and that a small protest was developing in the town center. This group allegedly planned to demand that the monster be removed by force if necessary over a public cemetery. The cemetery wasn't a natural habitat for wild creatures, according to Corwin, a hard-edged local. Alarmed, Ms. Hawkins hurried to the scene as Corwin said, "If we let it stay, who knows what might happen if it turns feral." Photographing the cemetery and protest posters that read, "Send the beast back." For people, not wolves, Lily's father shows up shortly after the watch. He got into a furious argument with Corwin, who accused him of facilitating a potential threat that we won't discuss. In the midst of the discussions, Corwin snapped, jabbing a finger in the father's face, and Miss stood by until someone was harmed. Hawkins saw the wildlife agent Dana, clean watching from the periphery. After the argument subsided, she went to Lily's father and folded to gauge the atmosphere. "I'm filing my..." In a hurried voice, she stated that the report tonight would include the suggestion that the wolf be moved to a controlled facility if it can't be persuaded to leave willingly. Her declaration filled Lily with fear, heard that a forced transfer might actually occur, separating Silver from the one house he had ever known, even though it was now simply a grave. Through these growing difficulties and conflicts in the neighborhood, an anxious countdown of foreigners with dubious intentions and government monitoring started raising the emotional stakes with each new development, attracting Lily. Dr. Braxton and her father, Tobias, Ms. Hawkins, looked more closely at Silva's destiny. However, the wolf itself continued to be a silent mystery beyond Agatha's final resting place, hovering there day and night. How long could that flame last in the face of so much? A fierce love and sadness burned under its unrelenting vigil. Opposition, it was evident that reckoning was drawing near, a last-ditch test of bravery and compassion that would not only determine Sela's destiny, but also expose the most basic aspects of human nature. A tenuous truce persisted outside the cemetery's perimeter in the cool midday light as townspeople walked by in quiet interest, not wanting to arouse the towering wolf that continued to watch over Agatha's grave occasionally. A passerby would respectfully place a little food offering and then turn away, unsure if the gesture was appropriate, would be welcomed or derided. Sela, who was enormously proud, persisted in refusing almost any food until it was delivered straight to the tomb, and anyone who ventured too close was abruptly met with a warning roar. But there was never any real violence. Rather, it seemed like the wolf walked a tightrope between primal guardianship and a stifled heartbreak that prevented him from moving. Rumors of Dana Klein's impending decision heightened strain. Despite having watched the scenario for days, the wildlife agent kept quiet about her final assessment. According to the local newspaper, she might request a tranquilizing procedure to safely move the wolf to a far-off location. Others in the sanctuary murmured that the agent's superiors, under pressure from a vocal group of terrified residents, would support. As a more extreme step, Lily, who was consumed by anxiety, went to the graveyard every day. Every time she knelt close to Klein, she whispered to her father about any fresh evidence that would change Klein's decision. In the middle of this tense situation, Lily's silver tears threatened to spill when she saw the unshakable sadness in his eyes. Tobias and his father started organizing a small watch group with the goal of preventing dishonest strangers or reckless. Dr. Braxton's vigilantes gave them a basic first aid pack, and if anarchy broke out, there would be enough tranquilizer darts to put the wolf to sleep, but no one enjoyed that idea while working night shifts and considering the morality of getting involved in Silva's vigil. Was it kinder to let him to grieve, or was it appropriate to take him away by force if his heartbreak meant that he might starve? Whereas Ms. Hawkins persisted, on his own terms, even if it meant risking his life. Her investigative writing skillfully woven the wolf's heartbreaking loyalty into a larger story about humanity's duty to the environment. Even as she received acclaim from some empathetic readers who kept up with her posts on the internet, she also received criticism from others who said she exaggerated a risky circumstance, one of which was, "You're feeding the wolf hysteria," someone said in an angry email, and another person urged she stop. Miss Hawkins' response to the glamorization of a savage beast was stern but courteous. She was only recording a reality that was difficult to classify in a straightforward manner. Creature demonstrating greater loyalty than many people in the midst of these rising. Lily's mental landscape was changing due to complications she had previously been drawn to, merely out of sympathy for the wolf's loss of its guardian. But as the days passed, Lily saw in Silver's unwavering loyalty that she felt the wolf went through was a mirror for human sorrow. Grief in the back of her mind that is just as real as any mourner's. The concern persisted. Could such a large heart finally collapse with the weight of that sorrow every time Lily? She sensed the beast quivering with pain as she attempted to entice Silver from the dead by offering him fresh water or a morsel. Perhaps the only way for him to move over his longing remorse was to keep a close eye on her. He made a last promise at home Lily's that he refused to breach in remembrance of Agatha. The father struggled with insomnia, rehearsing scenarios in his mind about what may happen if they plan a rescue Carrie. Would the wolf pardon him for taking Silver away by force if necessary to save his life? Such an infringement, or would Lily's mother react with bewilderment and treachery? Suggested that if Silver really belonged to the natural world, then nature should take its course. Both parents understood the heartbreak that would take hold of Lily if Sela went wild. Then human intervention might cause greater harm. They both had the goring fear that the wolf might never give up his watch unless someone killed him or disappeared. Behind the scenes, Dana Klein's impartiality deteriorated due to the conflicting demands of the municipality. She went to see Dr. I was surprised to hear Brayon confide in hushed tones one chilly day about the report she had sent to her agency. Given the public outcry, she acknowledged drinking a lukewarm cup of coffee in the veterinarian's little office located halfway across town. Says that the wolf should be removed, while the other half says that it is a sign of nature's purity. My bosses demand a clear suggestion, but I'm still not sure whether forcing him to snooze is the best course of action. Dr. Braxton's eyes ringed with. He acknowledged that there was no ideal answer because he isn't entirely wild or domestic. This is an emotional quagmire was more than simply a formality. That night, there was an unusually severe wind. Fearing that the wolf may freeze or sustain injuries, the storm pounded the village, toppling branches and rattling shutters. When Tobias and Lily's father went outside with torches and heavy blankets, they saw Silver clustered against the relentless wind, whipping Agatha's tombstone fur in spite of the wolf resisted moving despite the father's gentle prodding, calling Silva's name and offering the protection of a nearby shed. Tobias gazed at the strobe of nature's fury as lightning flared in the distance and thunder growled menacingly. The creature's uncompromising silhouette and had a sense of powerlessness. If he doesn't move the farmer, HEK will die out here, said, fighting back tears of annoyance. Dawn exposed the cemetery when the storm eventually passed. The image of the silver figure crouched against the cold, covered in rubble, left Lily. She hurried forward in tears, wrapping a blanket around the wolf's shoulders. To her amazement, Silva gave a gentle whimper and leaned into her embrace for a brief moment, seemingly accepting the comfort before shaking wearily. Returned to his spot at the base of Agatha's grave after the whole village had heard or seen his storm. The beaten vigil was silenced, and an unwritten agreement was made. Here, a monument to love and grief that went beyond the norm was taking shape. The tension increased concurrently, preparing the audience for a decisive turning point with Dana Klein's final. With half of the population terrified for their safety and the other half mesmerized by a wolf's loyalty, a decision is about to be made. Sharp distinctions were made. Would Silva's miracle of allegiance result in a forced relocation or a tacit community acceptance? And most importantly, might the wolf himself lived long enough for any result, holding onto a memory that, in many people's view, was on the point of domain of the sacred late one afternoon? A strange silence fell over the graveyard. A mild breeze replaced the wind that had been howling among the headstones for a while. Town residents were going about their daily tasks when they stopped and noticed a strange stillness in the air, similar to the calm before a storm at. Sela stayed still beside Agatha's grave, refusing to leave his watch. He hardly shook off the snow that was still sticking to his fur, Seemingly discarding any notion of consolation, Lily delicately placed a bowl of lukewarm stew on the table and attempted to persuade him to. In the midst of this frozen tension, a new element of fascination emerged. Her visitor. She tried to eat, but the wolf hardly acknowledged her offering. Showed up in the village and introduced himself as Gideon Roy, a self-described specialist on wolf behavior at the local inn. He had heard about the huge wolf's strange grieving and had come offering his services to deal with the. Despite his claim to have no official wildlife qualifications, Gideon's assured manner attracted those. In an attempt to find quick fixes, he said that if the people of the town wanted it, the wolf would be gently removed, but he was evasive about the strategies he would use or where Sela would eventually see a chance to get rid of a perceived threat. The Corwin's faction, who had previously attempted to organize a protest, warmed up to Gideon's offer and claimed that departing unrestrained, a wild predator was too dangerous, particularly close to a public graveyard where Lily's father was buried. Concerned about Gideon, he spoke in private with Mrs. Hawkins and Tobias. What if this supposed specialist is really another? He cautioned, recalling the past reports of a prophet seeking to take advantage of Silver. Ms. Hawkins, dishonest people seeking rare animals for their own benefit. Gideon's background investigation revealed only a patchwork of references to sporadic employment at local zoos. A few dubious blog posts concerning exotic animal care that are neither reliable nor substantial. He's either a. She concluded by warning that she was either a dangerously inexperienced meddler or con artist. Gideon's presence was also noted by wildlife agent Dana Clean, who spoke with him and described. Gideon became agitated as she pressured him for references and licenses on how he would humanely move that huge wolf. Avoided answering her inquiries about his determination to submit only credentials that could be verified. Increased her suspicions, but Corwin and his supporters persisted in defending Gideon's. Pressured Donna to allow him to handle the wildlife agent's issue. Her patience wore thin every time she attempted to complete her tasks, since she was torn between local needs and official procedures. Indicate that more disputes arose, delaying any definitive conclusion in the interim. With increasing dismay, Lily saw these tumultuous emotions every day as the wolf's. She was reminded by Sela's thin body and tired eyes that time was running out if she persisted. Regardless of Gideon's plans or the conclusion of Dana's report, his life would be in shambles during this starving vigil. Lily said to the wolf in quiet moments that she remembered Agatha and how the elderly woman had been sympathetic to a stray, kittens, and even helped a wounded person recover from a winter injury. But she wouldn't. Lily smudged her cheeks with tears, but just Silver, and said, "I want you to die here." A fresh wave of horror swept through the town as Corwin and a few followers looked beyond her, ensnared in his grief. Carried nets, ropes, and bought tranquilizer darts as they marched to the cemetery one clear morning with Gideon in tow. Online rumors said that with the apparent intention of using force to control the wolf, a small group of people gathered to observe from a distance, unsure of whether to step in or let. When Lily's father hears the disturbance, he rushes to the site, discovered Lily standing guard between the Silver and the men. She threw her arms wide and yelled, "Don't do this," as her heart pounded, knowing that even the smallest provocation could result in violence from the wolf or the. Gideon advanced with a rigid, egotistical stance, intimidating the men. Aside from the child he requested, "This wolf is dangerous and requires expert care." At that vulnerable moment, Lily's father swiftly moved to stand next to his daughter, disregarding Gideon's scowl, raised its head, flattened its ears, and let forth a low, guttural roar. Corwin was alarmed and raised a net, but Lily's heart was pounding more like a warning than an attack. Father yelled to pause, allowing Dana Klein to make a decision. Gideon hesitated. Hawkins was prepared to record the stressful moment, as Dana Klein had. Hurried over after learning of the altercation and appeared frowning. Her harsh words silenced everyone. Without authority, she turned to face Gideon, her face demanding that unless you are trespassing on a cemetery and putting the community in danger, even if you have a valid permit to collect wildlife. Gideon attempted to object in humiliation, but the town's residents' whispers soon overpowered his. Under public scrutiny, Gideon's plan to act alone might not succeed. He lowered his gear and gave Corwin a dissatisfied look. Lily knelt next to Silver once more in that moment of respite, crying with relief. Trembling with tension, the wolf streamed through but didn't lash out. Instead, he just closed. His eyes seemed worn out by the crowd's previous agitation during this perpetual siege. Fearfully appeared to be enthralled by a silent grief scene, even Corwin's. Although pride kept him from publicly acknowledging it, the wolf's obvious sadness caused his wrath to soften, so the confrontation ended in a drawer with no forced removal, no silver future, just a new beginning. The village saw a surge in apprehension, which indicated that more attempts might be made unless conclusive. After Dana pulled Lily's father aside, a solution surfaced, and I'm now finalizing. She quietly informed him that my report by tomorrow would probably advise sedation and relocation, but she left the grim if the public outrage was big enough or if the sanctuary strategy didn't work. That night, Lily's father and Tobias joined by a few others as an alternative. Good-hearted residents of the community restored night watch near the graveyard. Their presence discouraged Gideon from making any more efforts to Corwin. The wolf became noticeably weaker and hardly touched the food Lily offered every time she looked into his eyes, feeling as if the light was receding. In that silence, his spirit clung more to Agatha's memories than to his own survival. The icy moonlight made it brutally obvious that a climax was coming. Half measures had run out in the village, and the wolf, who was on the brink of death, might make everyone see an deed that would permanently alter their perception of the relationship between humans and beasts. The cemetery was threatened by gray clouds, which would certainly cover the headstones and cause further snowfall. Even while Dana Klein warned that she would finalize her plans, Silver in another frigid coat. Pretty soon, the people were caught in a stressful situation because no prompt action had been taken against the wolf. Gideon, the self-described wolf specialist, continued to loiter around town in anticipation of another opportunity to demonstrate his abilities. While Corwin's faction raged and demanded a definitive, Lily's father, Tobias, Ms. Hawkins, and a small group of sympathetic bystanders kept a close eye on things to make sure no one else tried to take anything away or hurt anyone. A faint light of optimism from an unexpected source, distant wildlife, came into this delicate balance. Ms. Hawkins, a sanctuary that specialized in huge dogs, using her network of contacts was able to get in touch with an old co-worker who verified that the sanctuary could accommodate one more wolf if the could be moved securely, and if the head of the facility thought it would benefit the animals, they were keen to find. A tactful conclusion, Mr. Hawkins informed Lily and her father that they'd sent a skilled handler with the right sedatives, and she clarified that there was no shady business or profiteering-like methods. Gideon's suspect may offer Sela the best opportunity to heal from his loss in a safe setting at Lily's. His eyes were filled with relief and a persistent sense of grief. But what if he wanted to? Agatha, would he be upset with us for taking him away? The father laid putting a consoling hand on her shoulder and understanding the gravity of her inquiry, recognizing that sometimes defending someone requires doing. He whispered, "What they can't understand," as he peered through the cottage window at the stoic wolf. "We can't allow the news of a potential sanctuary offer to spread rapidly among some townspeople. Lily, who is dying out there." They whispered that they were glad to see a humane attitude at least, while others pointed out. Gideon sniffed at the idea of allowing a wild animal to be forcibly moved since it still seemed like treachery. Outsiders intervened, murmuring darkly that he could complete the task more quickly and effectively. Corwin's clique continued to be suspicious of any scheme that would not guarantee the wolf's long-term disappearance, murmuring about a preliminary date for the sanctuary handler's arrival was arranged, but predators were still coming back to torment us. Considering the circumstances, Lily spent more time with Silver during these tense days than she ever did sneaking away to the before school. She would read about the cemetery and wrap herself in extra clothes to protect herself from the cold. Reading aloud from old storybooks, she pictured what Agatha and Silver may have discussed at the lonely cottage. Wolf didn't seem to care, so she found solace in the silent ritual, certain that somehow he felt less alone. One morning, she saw an elderly woman who was Agatha's distant relative, who arrived late for the burial. Seeing the fresh flowers at the grave and Lily's gentle handling of the wolf, the relative sobbed quietly. Agatha would be grateful, she said, caressing the wolf's head as it permitted the smallest amount of contact. She always claimed that love could subdue even the most ferocious hearts. In the meantime, Rowan, when the sanctuary approached Dr. Braxton, Lily's father faced an unexpected conundrum, warned him that there were dangers associated with sedating a wolf in such a fragile physical and emotional state if his body was compromised. She cautioned that the tranquilizer would make his vitals more difficult, but if we don't sedate him, securely transporting him could be. He's still a ferocious beast at heart, which is unthinkable. Rowan groaned as he remembered the wolf has recognized me, Lily, and a few others, but a stranger prodded him with his enormous teeth and strong protectiveness. Miss Hawkins tried to soothe him by saying that using a dart might cause a last-ditch reaction. Sanctuary staff have dealt with distraught candidates and wolves that were saved from appalling. If there's a place he might find peace, she said, they understand heartbreak and stress better than most. Rowan noticed the contemplative sadness in her eyes, as if she had seen too many tragic endings in her life. He developed a glimmer of resolve during his journalistic career, and he would battle for Silver if there was even a chance. Because of that, snowflakes whirled about the grave far above the leaden sky. Dana Klein, holding a clipboard, stood at a polite distance, dusting Silver's fur with a layer of glistening white. She observed the wolf for a considerable amount of time before coming up to Rowan and Lily, and I've concluded that she started speaking in a mixed. With relief and worry, I'm approving the sanctuary's proposal, and we'll work with them to get the wolf out of. Lily nodded. I apologize if that disappoints you, Town, but I think it's the best outcome under the circumstances. The father silently thanked Dana, acknowledging her, with tears of gratitude but agony. Difficult situation that night. In a last-minute difficulty, Gideon made a final push, offering Lily's father his services by encircling him outside the general store and promising a more private removal. The father politely but firmly declined, saying they would wait for Gideon, the professional team from the refuge. Miss Hawkins overheard him confronting him with her camera and spat in contempt, calling them idiots who were blinded by a monster. During his furious tirade, Gideon stormed off after realizing he had lost the public's affection, into the whirling snow, leaving a disturbing feeling of unresolved hostility in its wake. Consequently, all the components came together to form a village divided between a broken-hearted wolf clinging to its graveyard watch. Dread and compassion, a real sanctuary team, is approaching and is self-appointed. Tensions increased as Trapper became enraged at his unfulfilled ambitions. As he stood watch throughout the night in his porch, Lily's father lit a lantern. A mixture of relief, fear, and sadness at the impending farewell swirled in my chest. Lily sat at the window and sighed, silently praying that Silva would comprehend, but she refused to accept when the time came. That going on a rescue expedition would feel like a betrayal, she reminded herself, remembering the wolf's silent grace and devoted protection. Now it's my turn to keep him from giving up in the face of silent tombstones and whirling winds set the scene for the events that would determine whether Silver's story concluded with a calm transition to a fresh start or descended into tragedy at Agatha's snow-covered tomb in that precarious calm before. Each character in the final act prepared for the impending ultimate test of whether devotion could overcome grief, and if the wolf's anguish could yet turn into a survival miracle and a new opportunity at. There was a strange stillness in the village as the streets were muffled by a layer of snow. Graveyard, there was an unsettling silence that lasted. No footsteps, no whispered whispers, just the Agatha's grave was marked by a towering wolf. Yet behind this delicate silence, tensions rose to a breaking point. Silver supporting locals kept food and drink at a respectable distance, while those who, uncertain of how long they could wait for the sanctuary team, many of them grew more outspoken about their discomfort with his presence. When Gideon was still smarting, there was the greatest uptick in discontent, raising concerns that Silva would pass away from sadness before assistance could reach. Rumors that the wolf had turned aggressive started to circulate after he was rejected. He warned those who had heard that the monster would eventually attack a youngster, causing them to become anxious. He stated that he had first-hand knowledge that Silva had already bitten someone. He spread a falsehood without evidence, and the rumor enraged a tiny but passionate group that planned a second protest that. Signs demanding the removal of the wolf and wild were displayed at the cemetery gates. Beasts shouldn't be here, but some passers-by joined them out of curiosity or fear. Lily and her father observed the gathering from a distance hearts as a tense knot of people formed around the entrance. Ms. Hawkins, determined to record both, carried a camera over her shoulder as she led them into the graveyard. When the demonstrators saw them, they yelled warnings, saying, "We won't stand idle." Lily's father set his jaw, telling her to keep going as they approached, even if a predator was hiding among our dead. The wolf's ears twitched in Silver holding vigil while the snow continued to sprinkle his fur. At the far-off noise, but he stayed beside the grave, shaking with either grief or cold, and silence descended as soon as Lily. Everybody fell silent and watched as they knelt next to the wolf and softly spoke his name. The enormous beast allowed her to touch him, and the father's voice was tinted with frustration. Notice how he's grieving and not attacking anyone, even though some of Corwin's fans were hesitant to. Situation that conflicted with their anxieties. Gideon took advantage of the opportunity to say, "Hey, you're putting that girl in danger by allowing her to get close to a wolf." He yelled, gesturing angrily, and Lily looked up. She said, "I'm only hurting myself," with tears in her eyes. "He's never hurt me." Dana Clean, the wildlife, was remaining here in spite of the anxiety when a ripple of movement shook the back of the gathering. "I just spoke with the sanctuary," the agent said, stepping forward with a somber expression. Declared in a calm manner that their transport crew could arrive tomorrow if the town sensed that they would sedate the wolf humanely and transport him to a protected area. A chorus of whispers spread among the spectators, some of whom let out a sigh. Others were anxious because of fear of sedation, but relief hoping that this would bring calm back. Gone wrong, or a furious response from a wolf Corwin who was surrounded. His face reddened in the, "He belongs in the wild or not. So I say put him down." Cole barked a response. "One can ensure our protection. If not," other demonstrators muttered that they agreed. Under Miss Hawkins's camera, their resolve wavered, and Lily's father spoke softly to Corwin. "However, murdering him doesn't fix anything. He's lost and mourning, not a threat." Perhaps feeling the crowd's changing mood that night as darkness enveloped him, Cowan scowled but said nothing more. As part of their regular night vigil, Lily's father once again joined Tobias and a few neighbors at the cemetery. They constructed to make sure no rowdy group attempted to chase Silver away under the cover of darkness. A tiny, discreet fire was placed close to the gates. Despite the objections, a few villagers who had been won over by the wolf's devotion arrived with thermoses of hot. Sharing blankets and cocoa with the watchers created an uncommon bond between the people who, before, they hardly spoke or strongly disagreed with the wolf's destiny. Instead, they spent the hours narrating Agatha's generosity, recalling how she once provided refuge to travelers during a violent storm or nursed an abandoned baby. They caught a glimmer of the love she had shown Silverback at the cabin with Lily and Miz in every recollection. Hawkins got ready for the sanctuary team to arrive, and Dr. Braxton was going to supervise sedation to make sure there was no tension. Lily alternated between feeling sad that Seela might be taken far away and relieved that Silver was tired. She told Miss Tins that the wolf wouldn't slowly starve at the tomb if he will at least have an opportunity to recover while residing at the sanctuary. But can he ever forgive us for relocating him? M. Hawkins. Kind creatures comprehend in their own way, and they shrug their eyes. Even if they may not initially recognize it, freeing someone from their own misery can perhaps be the greatest act of charity. Everyone had the same optimistic outlook, with Gideon feeling that the approaching sanctuary was his last opportunity to show himself. According to operation rumors, he might try one final midnight snatch, using his own tools to capture Silver. This story encouraged Lily's father to covertly enlist more neighbors for a nighttime guard in order to sell or claim a reward. The ranger remained vigilant in an effort to stop any foul play. Every crunch of snow beneath their feet as they patrolled the cemetery's perimeter made them all nervous and ready for trouble. As the last few hours before the sanctuary's arrival drew near, the wolf's health declined with every breath, and the emotional stakes skyrocketed. Lily, who was on the verge of tears, saw a new tremor in Silver's legs as if the father knelt next to them because it had become a monumental struggle to rise up. For the first time in days, placing a canteen of hot broth against the wolf's muzzle. With a slight gleam of acceptance in his eyes, Silo licked at it feebly. Those watching the fragile scene looked at each other with relief. Late that night, the wolf sensed that help was on its way. Gravestones shone with starlight. The watchers formed a last line of defense by gathering around a lamp in case the demonstrators were misinformed or each face in the opportunistic poaches conveyed both stress and a calm determination as Lily and Coyote's yip floated across the snow in the distant alone. With Dawn ready to deliver the call, she wondered if Sylvie yearned to answer it and return to the wild she knew he acted for. Professionals from Sanctuary and a final decision prepared the town for the big reveal. Would Silver agree to sedation and transportation, or would his final feral SP vestige refuse to run the danger of a catastrophic result? Each character waited for the pivotal moment in the quiet of the icy cemetery, standing between grief and salvation, hearts racing with a mixture of fear and hope as the question goes unasked, persisted in each icy breath. Would this result in a silent rescue or an irreversible loss? Morning came in the sun peeking over the snowy horizon in a burst of pink and gold clouds, seemingly bearing witness to the last act of the. When the sanctuary team was scheduled to arrive at noon for Wolf's Vigil, the whole town appeared to hold. A silence fell over the grave, broken only by the breath it took in expectation. A.S. Lily, her father, and a few neighbors headed to the location beyond the ice. They heard the crunch of boots. Gatesila's once majestic form lay still beside Agatha's tomb. Lily's eyes wept when she saw how weak the wolf appeared in the clear light, with each exhale fogging. He had endured weeks of hunger and grief, and it was evident in the frosty air he had. Despite her cautious approach and her warm broth, the wolf hardly raised his head before letting out a faint whine, as though admitting her existence without having the strength to respond more. Dana Klein showed up with Simpson, and they planned to softly sedate Silver once another ranger reviewed the last-minute arrangements for the sanctuary transfer. Dr. Braxton prepared sedatives and loaded him onto a specialist transport van that reduced danger gripped her medicine bag. Face grim, but decided it was our best option. Chance she reminded everyone, her voice bearing a reassuring message that he can't endure this vigil for a lot longer. This is mercy, but the tension in the atmosphere suggested. Gideon, a self-described wolf specialist, continued to wander around the area, clearly agitated at any potential intrusion, at being marginalized. Corwin's group had likewise assembled remotely, donning mistrustful expressions, and Lily stood near her father, shaking with a mix of relief and sadness, unsure of how the morning's events might identify the groups that supported the rescue and those that wanted Silver's elimination, while those with more sinister motives appeared ready for a last conflict. Just before noon, two carried handlers emerged from the sanctuary team's van as it parked up close to the cemetery. Their equipment was rattling lightly, and they were wearing heavy winter jackets and tranquilizer darts, blankets, and a foldable stretcher. Looking about, they looked at each other intently, and it was obvious that this was not a typical rescue. They introduced themselves to Dr. Braxton and Dana, who quickly described the situation in hushed tones, and Lily listened, her heart racing every time she heard the. After saying sedate, the handlers eventually knelt down in front of Lily and her father, lowering ourselves to eye level and smiling kindly, promising to be gentle. And Lily nodded. I've done this before with traumatized wolves. Stress reduction is key. Tears welling up, she begged. Please don't hurt him the way he's been through. Silvera's trembling shape caught the handler's attention. We'll try our best to follow the plan Dr. Braxton prepared. Syringe of sedative, stating that in order to calm the wolf, they would first try a low dose. If he refused the handlers, they could give the injection covertly if he let Lily or her father get close. The father paused, Use a dart pistol from safe distance. Given how the wolf had fiercely protected Agatha, would it consider sedation to be a last resort? Betrayal. But a look at Lily's anxious expression made him decide that there was no chance of. Miscommunication was worthwhile in order to save the wolf's life. Slowly, they moved forward on the grave, with the father's LED head Lily closing, dragging a piece of cooked meat behind them in the hopes that the handlers would be eaten by Silver, while Dr. Braxton trailed after at a safe distance, tranquilizer ready. Dana Klein and Simpson remained at the gate, watching and getting ready to step in. If Gideon or Corwin supporters tried to interfere with the process, Seela shifted as they approached, raising his. With her heart in her throat, she knelt down to look at Lily. But it's okay. She offered the meat in a whispered, softly trembling voice, and the wolf sniffed it. Lily's father gave a low whine, but did not retreat at that brief interval. The veterinarian knelt on the other side, syringe concealed in her coat, and gestured Dr. Braxton forward, hands trembling a little. As Lily caressed the wolf's fur, she whispered soothing words, "Doctor." With a quick, professional action that was little more than a pinprick, Braxton gave the sedative, stiffening and emitting a. Lily whimpered in pain, but refrained from lashing out. The sound caused her chest to tighten. She screamed that this was betrayal, but she repressed her remorse since she knew that the wolf feared for Silver's survival. His golden eyes flickered with perplexity as the sedative set in during the silence. Seela's limbs relaxed, and her eyelids drooped while the little group waited slowly with Dr. With Braxton's approval, the sanctuary handlers entered and cautiously placed a stretcher next to the wolf, while speaking in a calming, low voice. Lily's father's arms, which were taut with emotion, helped them keep their composure. Lily's tears streaming down her cheeks as she lifted Silver's still breathing form onto the canvas held the wolf's muzzle one last time, her thoughts racing with recollections of how she had seen his unwavering loyalty. The moment erupted with intense emotion as onlookers from the community either looked on in relief or with lingering skepticism. Gideon frowned as he lurked at the edge, but he dared not step in. When Corwin's group saw the unadulterated compassion playing out in front of them, they stood speechless. Mrs. Hawkins recorded every moment on Lily's tear-streaked face on her camera, the handler's shaking grip, and the father's meticulous accuracy, and the drooping wolf's tragic loyalty despite. Then, a sudden silence descended as they carried Seela to the waiting van. Even the wind seemed to stop in the graveyard to observe the father, assisted in putting the stretcher inside, and gently placed the wolf on the plush bedding that the sanctuary staff had provided. Lily hovered at. One of the handlers put a consoling hand on the threshold, unwilling to release go. He will require time to recover her shoulder, but we will make all effort to assist him. Lily just nodded when they made the pledge, her eyes sparkling in the dappled light. As the van's doors closed, Silva's enormous body now faced the ultimate confrontation of sorts, a pang of collective stillness. For a gasping moment, no one moved, divided between thankfulness and regret that instead of a peaceful departure on his own terms, the wolf's vigil had ended in sedation. But for everyone, the arguments, the heartache, the anxiety, and the deep comfort brought about by Lily and her father's threat of vigilantes, impending starvation, and the bleak likelihood of the wolf dying at Agatha's grave had all been avoided as. Lily watched until her father disappeared from view as the vehicle rumbled away from the graveyard, leaving snow swirling in its wake. Led her carefully to the grave where Silver's final physical trace was still etched in a single paw print. Snow Lily dropped to her knees and covered the imprint with a shaking palm. It felt like a farewell to both Agatha and the other person, she said in a low voice. The father crouched next to her and pulled her into an embrace in the midst of Wolf's roar anguish. In the silence of that moment, they came to an unsaid agreement that they had seen such pure love, transcended species and even death, regardless of whether Silver would ever adapt to a sanctuary or return to the wild. His devotion's miracle would live on in their hearts, and everyone who saw it would feel a quiet silence. After the sanctuary van roared away with the sedative-ridden wolf, the once constant buzz of Gideon's whispered talks over the wolf problem and discussed protests at the graveyard. Posturing subtly simmered to a lull, but there was a sense of relaxation. Everyone was on edge due to lingering doubts about whether Silvera would actually find serenity at the refuge, or if the forest. His anguish grows as the days go by due to the sedation and remoteness from Agatha's tomb. Dr. Braxton called the sanctuary personnel after passing along updates, who said Sela was receptive but agitated, and they detailed how he spent. There was a glimmer of optimism despite spending hours staring at the cage gate and howling pitifully whenever other wolves came near. Sean claims that he is eating today, which is a significant improvement over the self-imposed famine at Agatha's tomb. Lily's chest began to lighten as she heard these snippets. Even the smallest stride forward for Sela provided a glimpse of assurance, but not everyone accepted the result as amicably as Corwins clicked despite the dissolution of their demonstration due to Silver's departure. They continued to speak out in local bars, whispering that the town had only avoided a bullet by sending the wolf away from Gideon, who was stung by the Publix. Darkly, who preferred the sanctuary team over his dubious methods, made a show of storming out of town, regarding people's resentments and disregard for actual expertise while suppressed left a tense undercurrent, as if any mistake may rekindle old. As Lily's father observed the change in sentiment, he became alarmed and understood that the story was. For those who had cherished Silver day after day, the story is far from over. Nagged him to see if there was any fresh information from Dr. Braxton, hoping for indications that the wolf was getting better emotionally. The father could also physically feel Lily grappling with a web of guilt because she had wanted to save Sela, yet detested to calm her fears at the prospect of him wallowing in captivity far from the one house he had ever known. He assured her that if the sanctuary decided that they could visit or possibly check if they could restore Sela into a protected forest in the future. In the meantime, Mrs. Hawkins interviewed villagers and continued to write the last chapters of her in-depth piece, documenting their changing viewpoints now that Sela was gone. Some expressed relief, but others talked about an anguish that Tobias acknowledged that the cemetery no longer had that powerful symbol of loyalty. Out of habit, he occasionally found himself strolling close to Agatha's grave, half expecting to see the wolf still there. As weird as it seems, the farmer gently said that he missed him. That hideous figure at the cemetery had taken on a reassuring quality of its own. One surprising development emerged from Agatha's personal stuff. A distant cousin found a small item while going through the elderly woman's few possessions. Agatha's thoughts on raising Silver were partially exposed in the journal's pages. How, after poachers killed his parents, she had actually saved him from a collapsed den. The mother's handwritten notes described the puppy's development and exceptional intelligence, and her silent worries that he would be left to fend for himself if she died first. The cousin was moved by the touching entries. He was never really wild from the beginning, Lily whispered as she read each phrase with tears in her eyes. She adored him, and he was orphaned from day one. The journal's contents provided Miss Hawkins with new information that, instead of being merely a wolf's mystical feeling of loyalty, Silva's unwavering devotion at the grave was the result of She turned these revelations into a lifelong bond between a mother and kid in everything but name. Her article's final copy, transforming the story into a moving example of what happens when kindness and animals' requirement in light of these developments. Dana Clean, the wildlife agent, was ready. In a rare moment of candor, she gave a final report on the entire affair. I came here anticipating that Rowan would order a typical capture or euthanasia scenario, but your community's response and that wolf's behavior changed me by demonstrating to me that these stories had deeper meanings than the written rules. The sanctuary's engagement was commended in the final proposal, which also proposed new procedures for handling similar situations and politely asked the municipality, if there was one, to establish a local wildlife committee. If future wolves or other wild animals needed assistance, a planned reaction may stop the mayhem they had to go through. Lily's emotional high was reached when Dr. Braxton told her that after weeks of hesitancy, Sanctuary announced a startling discovery, and Howling Sela had hesitantly started conversing with a different rescued wolf, an elderly female from a difficult history who also has a missing ear. Sela may develop a new pack bond, as suggested by his careful sniffing and group howling, which would gradually ease his sadness over Agatha. Lily discreetly wept upon learning that he had never visited that desolate tomb again, her relief mingling with sadness during The few who had appreciated Agatha's quiet strength put together a short memorial service, and Lily placed a little placard in remembrance of Agatha and her wolf, whose bond served as a reminder that love has no boundaries. Tobias, Miss Hawkins' father's ass, and a few of each neighbor felt the aftershocks of the story as they stood around the grave, dusting their coats. Some had developed greater empathy, while others had re-examined their preconceived notions concerning. Even a ranger who stopped by to pay respects acknowledged that wildlife, the regulations' tidy classifications of dangerous animals, and tame pets occasionally fall short of capturing the entire complexity of a relationship similar to that of Agatha and Silver's in these last minutes before the actual conclusion. The village appeared to be poised on the brink of commemorating the wolf's vigil as evidence of unwavering devotion. Consequently, Silver's sedation and transfer had settled the primary dispute, but the ethical concerns remained. Lingered. Could the sanctuary's tender care have healed the wolf's wounds from heartache and captivity? And an unsaid pledge was created for Lily, who had put her heart into rescuing Silver. Regardless of the distance, she would see him again one day, and in that promise, a spark of the conviction that bridging the gap between humans and beasts could result in miracles at final sunset was the foundation of Agatha's own spirit. Positioned above the graveyard, the new plaque caught the last of the sun, and Lily carefully followed the carved text with. Her father put a reassuring arm around her shoulders, and she took a last picture with her gloved fingertips, capturing the peaceful image of snow falling via the winter wind and covering the tomb, now free of the wolf's vigil. Sighing, a sense of promise pervaded the trees, as though Agatha's devotion and Silver's love had brought about anew compassion among all of them. Deep within the mountainous forest where the sanctuary was concealed among the ancient pines and the enormous wolf. Weeks had gone by since his deportation from the cemetery, yet the man known as Silver was still pacing agitatedly in a large enclosure. Staff members saw how he refused to let go of Agatha's tomb, and the memory of her clung to him with every breath. Completely blend in with the other wolves, particularly the older female, who occasionally put up with his big amber eyes. Though he was no longer starving, he gazed toward the enclosure entrance, as if anticipating an unconscious invitation to return. He still had a slight sparkle in his eyes, but it was overpowered by a persistent melancholy because Lily's village life had returned somewhat to normal. The cemetery is no longer the scene of protests or throngs, but is instead quietly reverting to the daily quiet of a cemetery for the departed, a modest plaque dedicated to Agatha, and all that Mark had left of the remarkable vigil that once held everyone was her wolf. Lily was spellbound, but her heart was still aching for closure. The sanctuary's news came in intermittent bulletins. Selah was emotionally aloof but physically recovered, and a smoldering phone call from Dr. Braxton conveyed the staff began to worry that if the wolf stayed trapped in sadness, he might never form a link with a new pack. Then came the Miss Hawkins. You were the driving force behind the final resolution following weeks of editing and her in-depth piece on Silver's story. The Wolf That Wouldn't Leave the article weaving was published by Reflection. Included villager interviews, Lily's heartfelt testimonies, and Dr. Braxton's medical discoveries, and Dana Klein's grudging acclaim soon spread beyond their limited area. Letters and emails from sympathetic wildlife enthusiasts flooded in, and people who were moved by the idea that an animal might have as deep loyalty as Lily's read. Many people were inspired by these remarks and wrote about how animals, sometimes they required a last farewell, an opportunity to view or feel their loved one's last resting place before continuing the scam. Given that all creatures have instincts, Sepp appeared both mysterious and strangely rational. Of closure, just as people might require a final moment at Agatha's tomb, Lily hesitantly suggested a bold plan to her father as a way to relieve his grief. But what if they brought Selah along? Return to the village one last time in a controlled setting so he can see, perhaps providing him with the farewell he never really had under Agatha's grave. once again in a nurturing setting. Her father was hesitant to give her medication because there were clear risks and the town might not readily agree to bring the wolf back. But Lily's belief, which is backed by and hope, was restored by Hawkins' new generation of readers who support the concept of animal agency. After hearing Lily's suggestion, Dr. Braxton cautiously agreed if the sanctuary employees are ready to assist him emotionally, and we oversee all safety measures. Even Dana Clean, who was first dubious, conceded that the SE appears to lack closure, believed the idea was sympathetic as the wolf's transportation involved anesthesia, and the biggest obstacle was convincing the sanctuary to return the wolf to its original location after careful supervision. Once, following multiple conference calls, the director of the sanctuary was moved by Ms. Hawkins' article and almost died protecting. Consented to a visit under supervision with the stipulation that the town as a whole coordinate security measures to prevent a disaster. The plan would be abandoned if there was even the slightest indication of disorder or vigilantism. The formerly divided village came together in an unexpected display of solidarity in the face of that difficulty, and Corwin's Putin, however unimpressed, acknowledged that a well-planned, closely watched event would be safer than taking a chance. Covert actions by dishonest people. Tobias volunteered to assist in standing watch, and Lily's father their yard for a quick break if necessary. And so a few weeks later, on a brisk morning, the sanctuary transport truck showed there. Crowds gathered in the village once more, respectfully apart, curious, but Lily, shivering with eagerness and feeling a little reverent, watched as the handler appeared carrying a silver that had been slightly sedated. Although the wolf's massive body retained its regal majesty, his eyes revealed a tormented air. Dr. Braxton and Dana Klein remained nearby to make sure nobody became alarmed. The intention was to simply escort Seela to the cemetery for a brief, supervised visit to Agatha's tomb, and then bring him back to the sanctuary before dusk, when silence descended. As the group entered the cemetery, snow glistened on the tombstones, which were unaltered except for the Seela was led on a soft leash as Lily walked ahead, following the caretaker's footprints. When he got close to Agatha's ultimate resting place, he twitched muzzledly with stiff caution. His body trembled as if he recognized every tree, every snow drift, and the recollection of his. Seela's eyes stepped forward, and the vigil flowed back in startled silence. He let out a low whine, half snarl, half lament, and dropped onto the plain cross that marked Agatha's grave. With the snow falling hitting the base of the crucifix, Lily felt a cold tear go down her cheek. She knelt down, ignoring the lumps in her body, hoping he would find comfort, but instead he appeared to crash over her. She put a hand on his heavy coat and muttered, "It's okay," her eyes pricking. "You can now be free because we brought you back to see your eyes." Then, slowly, the silver rose head tilted skyward with a piercing resolution that no one had expected. A somber scream from his mouth, echoing around the quiet cemetery and making everyone in the area. As if the wolf had emptied forth, the mournful cry rolled on roar. Every last bit of unresolved sorrow was shed by some, while others bent their heads in a moment of respect. Then as Seela raised his muzzle from the cross and rotated it, brushing it as the wail came to an end, Lily's cheek in a brief but purposeful motion akin to a last goodbye, and in the silence that ensued, he let out a breath. For the first time in his memory, he took a deep breath and relaxed his shoulders, whether it was a wave of comfort or acceptance that passed through him, or it was unclear at the time whether the anesthesia was still affecting his feelings. But Seela, the handler, softly led him away from the grave without the shuddering hesitation that had previously imprisoned him. For the first time, he didn't try to stay behind Lily as he headed toward the van. She let out the air she had been keeping the audience apart with her unrestrained sobbing. As Silver was loaded, Agatha's memory and the wolf were both left speechless by what seemed to be a ceremony of closure. The father threw a reassuring arm over Lily's shoulders and whispered, "I'm letting go," as they entered the transport van. With tears in her eyes, Miss Hawkins's voice was filled with passion as she recorded the last moments of the wolf's departure. Even Corwin at the crowd's fringe lowered his arms and nodded respectfully at his eyes in a unique moment of silent wonder. Thus, with that heartbreaking cry and serene approval, Silva's tale reached its poignant crescendo, releasing the tension that had previously kept the hamlet in terror and, for a brief period, all disagreements vanished into a moment of collective awe. Recognize the strength of a connection that went beyond reason, the wolf's unshakable loyalty to the one who had brought him up, and the kindness of a society that, despite its hesitancy, managed to honor that bond shortly. The van's doors closed with a soft thud, and as it rolled, the engine roared to life. Like the final notes of a symphony that had evoked the depths of every heart in the room, a silence persisted. In the weeks that followed Silva's last goodbye at Agatha's burial, the scene was set for a resolution that went beyond simple survival. A sudden feeling of solidarity descended across the town, replacing the angry demonstrations and contentious disputes regarding the. Instead, the wolf whispers over neighbors' fences or in the neighborhood diner described how the devotion of a wild creature had reminded them of virtues that are frequently forgotten, inspiring awe and a silent type of adoration. The sharp cry that echoed across the cemetery was never forgotten in the bustle of daily life. Or how Silvera appeared to find relief throughout his intense period of grief. Even though Lily missed the wolf and was concerned for his safety, the emotional journey left an enduring impression on her. She carried a soft serenity in her heart while she adapted to life in the sanctuary, and occasionally she received an email or phone call from the. When Sanctuary showed up with updates, Sila had already started to explore the larger enclosure and engage with a small pack. After being saved from terrible conditions, he stopped refusing food or human contact. A staff member also explained how F occasionally lifted his muzzle in a muted manner under the gentle moonlight, howl with a more organic wolfish tone rather than the raw sorrow that once rocked the settlement. They said that Lily was crying uncontrollably and that he was learning to be a wolf once more. Comfort in the knowledge that she was also recovering if he was. And Agatha's tiny gravestone became a modest sight of. Villagers offered little gifts of appreciation, a wildflower, and a statement regarding. The character was initially apprehensive about a simple carved ornament that resembled a wolf's paw, or how her link with silver inspired them. Concerning a predator that haunted the grounds, he now maintained the plaque neat and looked at it thoughtfully every morning. Told Lily's father in private one day, and I can still sense her spirit there. Some refer to her friend's discovery of his route as superstition, but the caregiver saw it as belief that even in a hostile world, Corwin's faction, goodness can blossom. Initially resolved to expel the wolf, Corwin became more lenient in the aftermath, but he was still concerned about the. Even he couldn't ignore the feelings of appreciation for Sila's ability to grieve and let go of the danger that wild animals posed. His group shifted their focus to more pragmatic issues rather than protesting or calling for deadly methods. The town's worries dismissed the wolf saga as a warning and hoped to never see Gideon again. After the sanctuary personnel left, the self-described expert disappeared from local rumors and was last seen furiously speeding out of town. Took care of Silver. He didn't make much of an impression, and it's more of a warning about how opportunists could take advantage of sensational stories for one's own benefit. Dana Klein's last report to her organization detailed the intricacies and empathy of play. She suggested more stringent rules for handling distinct people, wildlife relationships, stressing the necessity for compassion in every situation rather than only following the rules. Her office took her recommendations under advisement, indicating, astonished by the nuance, that the event may influence future regulations for wildlife management in the interim. Journalist Ms. Hawkins, whose work had documented Silver's journey from the beginning, to finish her last painting, in which a wolf laments the way that love bridged, published in a local magazine and online, The Wilderness and a Village. Narrative struck a chord much beyond regional boundaries, drawing readers' attention with its heartwarming depiction of devotional emails that flooded in from all throughout the nation. Some were from educators who wanted to tell the tale to their students, while others were animal behaviorists who were fascinated by Silva's devotion, and several expressions of gratitude from regular people for serving as a reminder that kindness might blossom in unexpected Locations. Miss Hawkins sent a follow-up letter explaining how the sanctuary sent out updates on a regular basis, including pictures of Silver. She wrote a positive message in the last paragraph, adjusting to his new pack. Occasionally, a broken heart serves as the catalyst for Wolf, and Lily's father is relieved to see his daughter more at peace, as they are both human. That the experience had affected him as well. So after work, he started taking walks close to the border of the forest and enjoying the sound of pine needles beneath your feet and the far-off echoes of nature in silence. But there were times when he thought back to Agatha's soft resolve and the steadfast devotion she had fostered in a wolf pup. Although these recollections were laced with sadness, a sense of pride also arose since he and his neighbors had met the challenge head-on. In time, Dr. Ton defended an existence that was neither completely wild nor domesticated, but nevertheless worthy of compassion. Stated that Sela's physical strength had completely returned, and that his once frozen leg was no longer impeding his movements, but there was still a slight scar that served as evidence of his past. The sanctuary personnel would sometimes joke that Silver served as a protector for more recent rescues, calming tense animals with a demeanor evocative of the caregiver. He wants to know if the wolf actually remembered Agatha, or if it was just repeating the teachings she had learned about love. Given, no one could be sure, but the result was a clear Silver. Once ensnared in despair, they managed to flourish once again on a sunny. Miss Hawkins accompanied Lily and her father on a spring afternoon excursion to see Silver at the sanctuary, to record the staff's cordial greeting and attentive monitoring as they navigated the meandering confines. Silver stood among the softly flowing grasses as he approached the barrier, stopped when he noticed her ears moving and her nose trembling, like though she was remembering a faraway but beloved scent. And then in a moment, the wolf walked forward, huffing softly and rubbing his muzzle against the chain link, bringing tears to Lily's eyes. Lily gasped in realization, uncertain if he had actually recalled yet, as Sela replied with a soft rumble in his voice as he softly whispered his name, a tiny, gentle symbol that restored the connection between their worlds. Sometimes, under the bright sky, Lily experienced a calm unlike anything she had ever experienced. Even the most heartbreaking losses may be eclipsed by love and gratitude, so she silently thanked Agatha, whose spirit, stepping back from the fence, she and her father let the wolf to return, appearing to linger in the breeze like a warm presence. Feeling content that he had selected a house that was secure, well-maintained, and they also discovered a way to escape the trap of unending grief. Silent conclusion that would remind them of a reality that transcends boundaries, species, and even death. Devotion may blossom in the most unlikely places, transforming pain into wonders. If you were moved by Silver's tale and Agatha's unwavering link with a once-orphaned wolf, we cordially encourage you to come celebrate the strength of compassion with us, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of bridging the gap between people and animals, such as this movie, to help us in our objective and spread the word so that others can see what real. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Agatha's legacy and how one tiny act of kindness may demonstrate commitment, can resonate throughout a whole community, and by working together, we can continue to build relationships, can overcome barriers and foster optimism even in the most hopeless environments of anxiety or sadness.